Hi, I'm Lori Jones, President and CEO of Avasec Communications and host of StrategyCast. Join me and my guests, innovators, disruptors, and visionaries, as we explore bold and brave marketing strategies that help you transform, scale, and grow your brand. Marketing is often the most understood function in a business, seen as either a cost or a megaphone. But what if it was the strategic force that unlocks real growth? Enter my guest, Rebecca Shaddix. She's built a career proving that marketing isn't just about campaigns, it's about aligning teams, driving measurable impact, and reshaping the way businesses operate. As a Forbes contributor and a B2B SaaS marketing strategist, Rebecca knows what works and what's just noise. Today, we're breaking down how to bridge the gaps between departments, set KPIs that actually drive business, and position marketing as a revenue powerhouse. Let's get started.
A competitive edge starts with strategy, and strategy starts with knowing how to develop one. StrategyCast is a leading marketing podcast that serves up strategic insights, trends, and tips to help separate your business from the pack. Tune in weekly as host Lori Jones interviews bold marketing leaders who have priceless wisdom and are willing to share. Each episode explores cutting-edge approaches that have proven instrumental in transforming brands into industry trailblazers.
Welcome to StrategyCast. I'm so excited to have Rebecca Shaddix join the show today. Hello.
Hi, Lori. Good to see you.
Well, it's good to see you. I've been looking so forward to this show. We are really going to be diving into, it's a meaty, actually massive topic. And it's about building strategic bridges, marketing's role in driving business success. Before we get there, tell us a little bit more about your background and marketing journey.
Love to. So I came into focusing on product and lifecycle marketing through an accidental falling into digital marketing. I had a great opportunity to join a startup shortly after school that was focusing in a field that I was really passionate about and just fell in love with how creative and analytical marketing is. So I have been here ever since. I have been at mostly B2B SaaS companies, primarily mission-driven ones, education, healthcare, and HR tech, that we're really looking at unlocking potential with technology. And I'm also a Forbes contributor, and I write about overlooked implications of advancements in tech, which has been a fun 10-year journey too, to see how things like AI have evolved. And I just love the power of tech to really impact the world at scale, and I'm excited to talk about how marketing can amplify it.
Well, I love it. I love that you're so deliberate about the type of companies that you're working with too. You mentioned mission-driven companies, and they all tie, in the health and wellness space at some level. When did you know that, or what importance did you place on the need to really say, okay, I'm not going to work on, a SaaS platform that helps, beverages succeed. I want to work on something that really impacts people.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think impact at scale has just sort of always been a value my family placed, and just thinking about where you could have the most value. I actually didn't intend to go into marketing. I planned to become a teacher, and I took a 1-year hiatus, Teach for America, where I was going to teach 7th grade in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to go try this startup experiment out, and just fell in love with it. And so I think that alignment with your values, what you feel good about, the impact, is really important to excel. I think you can do a job that you don't feel connected to, but if you really want to excel at it and feel fulfilled by it, there has to be some alignment. So that values-based with the team, with the impact, with something unique about the product has always just been a driving factor for me.
Yeah, the mission of the culture, the mission of the lifestyle that the culture creates, the company, or what you're marketing, what you're selling, I think are all real key contributors there. So we're going to break this show down, listeners, into 3 different segments. And the first segment that we're going to talk about is establishing strategic value tied to business outcomes. So the CMO's role is ever evolving, and it's really moving into not just a marketing strategist, but truly a business strategist as well. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, I think the storytelling connective tissue between what we're prioritizing in marketing and what the business is seeing the results of has never been more important to be precise with. Sometimes we think of shortcuts of we in marketing are focused on messaging and positioning, and we assume it'll be clear why the business should care about it and the impact it'll have. But for those who don't focus on it day to day like we do, making the connection between why improving our messaging and positioning is going to impact the bottom line isn't intuitive. And so I think it's more important than ever to really justify the impact, especially as we've gone towards this very quantitative, data-driven approach. The connective tissue between our dashboards and revenue, how they're making the inputs drive those outputs is really important to finesse with deep qualitative understanding of our market, of our internal stakeholders, and what we're seeing, because all of the data in the world can't make a decision for us. Being able to back that up with the business impact is so important.
Yeah, I could not agree more. It's very, very interesting. I think a lot of marketers are, in a bit of a quandary right now over feeling as though they've got to be invited to the C-suite table, even if they're a VP of comms and not, at that C title, um, to have business discussions. What advice do you have for those individuals who feel they've got to be invited versus just walking in and saying, I need to be here?
Yeah, I think you don't need anyone's permission to start making the connection. Cross-functionally, if you can improve the effectiveness of product teams, for example, send an email. Maybe you're not in the physical meeting, but you can start bringing visibility to your work, to your results, sending cross-functional emails or updates that make it visible what you're working on, the impact that it's driving, and why the team should care, including calling out new opportunities. So I like to think of goals as cascading, ideally, starting with the business level strategic vision, going into departmental goals, then, so let's say business level goals, marketing goals, then each department's.
Right.
You don't need permission to make connection between strategic goals that people don't see marketing is driving and having that impact. Maybe people don't see you as a primary driver of retention, for example, but if you can show why account management will benefit from an idea that you have, suddenly you have taken a seed, even if you're not physically in the meeting yet.
It is, that's just chock full of great, great advice. It's really meaningful. Having the conversation is important. What ideas do you have to initiate those productive upfront conversations to set, that cascading component there up for success?
Start with what they care about. I understand that you're focused on improving net revenue retention this quarter. I think that driving engagement through these marketing campaigns will have an impact there. Can we discuss further? Or I understand that we're having challenges closing this type of deal for these reasons. Here's some objection handling that I think could help. Really plugging into what the person you're talking to cares about and then tying your impact to it makes that story that much clearer in their mind, because people don't understand necessarily the function. They may think they know what communications does, for example, but if they think of the impact as siloed, it's up to you to break that down.
Right. How do you educate along the way as well? Because it's one thing to ask questions and be in the room, but the marketing landscape is ever evolving. I mean, look at what generative AI has done, in the last 18 months, 2 years. And, educating, I think, is a very, very important component here to make sure everyone has buy-in and they're on board.
Yeah, it's a great question. I like a framework with three parts to that, starting with here's what we know. So really clearly articulating, we know that generative AI is making an impact in this industry or holds promise for marketing. Here's what we are testing. This is some bets that we're placing. Here's what that could look like at scale. So you start with establishing the same assumptions. Here's what we know. Here's what we're testing. We have these hypotheses, these metrics that we'll use to measure results. And this holds the potential at scale for X. So you've talked very tactically about something that you want to start alignment on, because if there's misalignment down the road, it may start with, here's what we know, not being clearly defined. If you can establish that here's what we know, then you say, here's what we're testing. You're showing you're proactive in what you're doing about it. In a way that doesn't sound like you're taking a ton of bets or risks with the company's resources. You're showing how you're measuring success, what a tripwire would look like. So if things aren't going well, how you'd pull the plug. And then here's what this looks like at scale is why it matters. So you've given people a very clear opportunity to get on board or raise concerns with any part of that without derailing the whole vision and adding value to the rest of it. So they see why it matters. And then you could align on misalignment that doesn't
I
throw
love
the entire.
That's fantastic. Do you have any client examples, brands that you've worked on or industry examples where you've really seen this take hold and it's become very successful?
This meaning,
The campaign, the initiative, the relationship, there's just so many different ways to slice and dice this very, very meaty first third of our conversation.
yeah, I think Unbounce is a great example of taking bets and risks that don't compromise the core value of their products with ad-based AI, landing page-based AI, generating AI very effectively through pretty nascent technology. I think they were very quick with integrating new AI components into their product in a way that felt fleshed out relatively to see value early on, but also kept their core value prop in place. You could use their existing product exactly as you knew it, and you could test out these new AI components without compromising how you knew the product. So it was a good way to get real feedback on what is working and what isn't without causing too much of a disconnect between where the technology was and where it could go.
Well, and the speed in which you find the feedback in this
Mhm.
situation seemingly had to have been very, very quick.
Absolutely.
Uh, so I'm going to give you a quote, and I want you to finish it. I think this is really fun. We've never done this on the show before. So marketing is not a cost center; it's a growth driver. Here's how I've proven that.
I've proven that with data. I think that making that very clear ROI story from this is the input, this is what's changed, comes down to data. If just the correlation between dates and change isn't enough, showing how these two different groups who were seemingly identical had different experiences and generated different results is the way to do that. And I think that really being intentional about these are the leading indicators of success that tell us we're on the right track or need to pivot, that are causing these lagging indicators of success that business cares more about is the right way to do that. So you don't start judging things prematurely and killing something promising or investing too heavily in something that could impact near-term results without driving the long-term business value that you care about. So that balance is really, I think, where it comes in. And when I say data, the quantitative data is easiest to anchor in. You have to fill it in with qualitative. If you're not having regular customer conversations, you're probably drawing the wrong conclusions from those dashboards.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. I think that's absolutely vital. So this next segment is all about establishing the KPIs so that you are having the good conversations and really KPIs that matter. There are many, many darts that are thrown at the target and they don't need to be there. It doesn't need to be a KPI. And really focusing in, I think, is a key element here. How do you identify KPIs that truly do align with the goals at hand and don't end up really being missionary work, surrounding something that you might need to consider downstream?
Yeah, it's a great question. The short answer is less is more, being very intentional, because if you have 16 metrics up and 4 really matter, the other 12 could be a distraction because if it looks like you're hitting only 4 out of 16 metrics, 25% of them, that looks like a fail. But if the other ones are secondary, be really clear. These are the North Star, Tier 1, whatever you call them, metrics or metric, singular, that matters. These are secondary metrics that we also care to influence because we don't want to ramp up close rate at the expense of retention, for example, by closing poor fit customers. So secondary metrics that you also care about, but really need to be considered side by side. But then being intentional about the difference between the top tier primary, the secondary ones, and those leading versus those lagging indicators is important. I also think before any initiative, establishing time-based metrics, we expect to hit this metrics by this date. If we don't, here's what we're doing about it. Lets us feel more proactive with pivots and taking big risks. So it doesn't feel like a punitive blame game if something doesn't pay off, first of all. So the first is less is more. The second is establishing that clear tripwire. If we don't hit X by Y date, here's what we're doing about it. So we have agreement on the plan up front. But then also, I think that the how you set these metrics is even more important than the metrics you ultimately set. Because if people don't understand why they're important or aren't bought into them, there's the risk that even if you do hit these metrics, they may not see you succeeding by some other arbitrary set of metrics that you don't think are as important, but you haven't surfaced that misalignment. So making sure that the visibility into the process is very collaborative and cross-functional. You explain why you're setting metrics and surface them, where the dependencies, how will other teams, product, account management, sales influence them, is ways to build credibility into why you're prioritizing those metrics.
I think the elephant in the room here is awareness, right? It's difficult to measure. And I don't know that most people have the right recipe. You've got to start out somewhere in order to measure from. What advice do you have for people regarding how they should be measuring awareness?
Do you mean marketers, or are we talking about
Marketers? Yeah, marketers.
Yes. So for marketers, I would say start with the top level business metrics and then directly cascade down from that. You can call it a waterfalling metric of directly from the top level business objectives, whatever those strategic pillars are, tie your North Star tier 1 metric to the business level metrics, because then you're showing the high level significance of what you're working on in a way that'll resonate more connectively.
Right. I often have difficulty, especially with a startup, in answering this question because you are starting from zero. But one way that we've always taken a look at it is at 6 months, at 12 months, what is unaided brand recall? Surrounding the brand, which is again where a lot of these conversations needs to take place, and you brought up earlier. So I think that's some advice that's been very fruitful for the agency there as well.
Nice. That's awesome.
The tracking this is key, right? Making sure that you've got some sort of a dashboard developed. How do you develop your dashboards? And are you using software for it, or is it a simple AI tool or an Excel tool that brings it all together for you? What are you doing?
Good question. I'm using Looker right now. It's a BI tool that I like that consolidates a lot of different insights. But I would say that different tools make sense at different stages of companies. And as long as you have confidence in how the data is being collected and stored and used, that's really what matters. I've tracked on spreadsheets, and sometimes I pull together and export spreadsheets of just the data that different stakeholders need. I love having those inputs come together through product analytics, marketing analytics to be consolidated into insights that we care about. But simply within whatever tool you've decided to prioritize, HubSpot, Mixpanel, whatever it is, you can get value out of that. So I've done it a lot of different ways. In short, more complex tools tend to make more sense when you have more complexity of stakeholders to keep informed, but they take more resources to implement and maintain and get any value out of. So I think a simple spreadsheet can be fine if you have a way of populating it that's reliable and a way of circulating it.
I love that. What is a common KPI mistake that you see a lot of people making?
Common KPI mistake is time-based. So not making it clear what we expect to achieve and measure by a certain point. So then we kill things that are promising too soon, or we let things persist that aren't connected to overall objectives. So an example of this would be not clearly articulating the leading indicators. We expect this campaign will generate this leading indicator of impressions, form fills, clicks, etc., which should then lead to these metrics of close rate, revenue, etc., which should have a strong retention if we keep persisting through driving value and renewing. Any one of those disconnects, we can judge things prematurely that have promise, or we can miss out on letting things persist because these leading indicators haven't been tied to lagging indicators that matter. So it's easy to have a vanity metric that feels really good that doesn't matter, or it's easy to think, oh, we haven't seen a meaningful lift in unaided brand awareness yet, but it's too soon to actually tell. Those are the most common mistakes. They're time-based.
There's so much meat on the bone in this conversation. I can just imagine our listeners right now just taking a lot of notes. What do you feel is the hardest component to measure?
I think dashboards have given us the illusion that we can have a finite, measurable first or last touch attribution. There will always be things that matter, that impact the buying cycle, that impact behavior, that we just can't measure, that we will never be able to measure. And this is a little bit of an extreme example, but it's from my life, and I think it's fun to make the point memorably. I have wanted a Tiffany engagement ring since I was 12 years old. I told my husband that. He bought me a Tiffany engagement ring. 3 years later, we were talking about it, and a friend of mine asked about my ring. And I told her, yeah, I've always wanted a Tiffany engagement ring because in Elf, she says she wants a Tiffany engagement ring and for her boyfriend to stop dragging his feet and commit already. And my husband looks at me and goes, that's why? You'll never, ever in a million years be able to attribute the fact that 10 years after seeing that show, I wanted a Tiffany engagement ring. This happens a lot, though. The word of mouth conversations are driving a lot. And even if you ask people how they heard about you, maybe it's right then, maybe it was initially. People answer that question very differently. And so I think that the illusion that we can measure everything and things that don't have direct measurement aren't valuable is the biggest problem with how we measure things. And that's just one example. The dashboards are, yeah, go ahead, are only as good as the inputs, and the inputs will never be perfect.
I totally agree. So I'm going to give you a quick Tiffany story as well. So my granddad and my mom were New Yorkers, and he bought her gifts at Tiffany's all the time on Fifth Avenue. And so breakfast at Tiffany's is one of those things that I just love. It reminds me of just envisioning my grandparents at that location, together in love, building a family, all this sort of stuff. So fast forward many, many years, my daughter, we've got four kids, two daughters, and one of them, well, they both love, love, love Tiffany's, but one of them has Tiffany, each of the kids have a Christmas tree in their room, and one of them has all these Tiffany boxes underneath her Christmas tree. Every year she puts them out, and it's that, it's that passion of the blue, right? It's that, it's me telling the stories of growing up and my grandparents that has really created that affinity, which ties into this point, perception. Measuring perception, I think, is one of those areas that we've gotten better at over the years. Net Promoter Score is a good example of that. But it is very, very difficult to quantify and create meaning out of it because of the two examples that you and I just mentioned.
Absolutely. I also think NPS is one of the easiest to misattribute metrics. The people who are willing to fill it out tend to be on different sides. The way you word questions, the way you order questions, the length of your survey, all of these impact really how actionable the metric is. And so anything that relies on pulling people out of their normal buying cycle or behavior to tell you what they do versus a metric that's simply measuring what they do is already a level removed from the inputs that matter, which is why the qualitative interviews are so important to figure out two different buyers who have the exact same buying behavior may look identical to us, but have completely different motivations. Your daughter and me, we may have very similar Tiffany buying behavior for very different reasons. People would never know that. They might group us together by gender, demographic, location, if we're both in metropolitan areas, for example. That is exactly what we're talking about, that there will always be things that deeply matter that you can't measure. And the idea that what gets measured gets managed is true, but it doesn't mean that what can't be measured doesn't matter. And I think too often we've extrapolated, if I can't measure it, then I can't change it, and so it doesn't matter. That couldn't be further from the truth. And that's where I think good and great brands differentiate themselves from mediocre brands. The ones who think they can measure everything that matters are going to miss out on tons of opportunities to be bold and take risks in ways that may not scale, but can really make an impact.
Oh, that's so meaty. Again, so setting the teams up to succeed and to really be able to put their foot down when asked about a KPI that they don't think is going to be relevant involves a lot of training, it involves a lot of communication, and it involves a lot of education internally
Mhm.
that the teams are aligned. So this third segment is just that, setting teams up for success. How do you set realistic but still ambitious goals for teams at the same time?
Yeah, it's a great question. Rooting in some kind of reasonable benchmark. There's a reason we're setting this goal. It's an X% increase over this current metric, which we believe we can achieve because of this market dynamic, increase in resources, change in strategy, etc. Benchmarking something realistic and then pushing just a little beyond is exactly how I'd think of setting ambitious yet realistic goals that actually matter. And it's easy to miss that. It's just to say, let's double this year. Well, that's fantastic. Why and how and what's changing to get there
Right. You can't use the same marketing budget to double. And I think, a lot of
without a significant market change or team change or strategy
exactly
change.
like a
Yeah,
competition, something happening to the competition or something like that. But all too often, I think the accountability isn't there, or people overshoot goals. Like, let's take it back to the awareness discussion we were having earlier. It takes a quick awareness for, an unknown brand or someone who's really retrenching is 18 months.
right.
That's quick. Most brands build within 3 to 4 years. There's millions of different caveats for that. Like, do you launch with a $2 million Super Bowl ad and then have lots of follow-up? That's going to shorten that. But nonetheless, it's very, very difficult to quantify. How do you have the discussion about brand and awareness and be realistic if the right budget is not there to succeed the KPIs and the goals that might be a dictate from a board or a CEO?
I like to start by understanding where the request is coming from. So that means just a lot of questions that ideally will lead who the person you're talking to make that conclusion themselves. So if they say, we need to double revenue this year, headcount is flat, budget is flat. Why is this important now? The answer is going to tell you a lot when getting pressure from the board. Okay, what does the board want to see? They want to be confident that we are a good return on their investment because they have to raise another round. Okay, what would it take to look like we're a good investment? Well, they have to see these strong numbers. Okay, here's how we can influence those numbers meaningfully. And then you set ambitious goals co-createdly of understanding why this is a priority now. And obviously that'll change it, but there's two parts of this. Asking questions to make sure you understand why something is the case, why it's relevant, goes down to your team asking for more time off, all the way up to the CEO and the board of why they're setting certain goals. And if they are arbitrary, letting them come to that conclusion themselves, understanding what really matters. Sometimes I like to lay out 2 or 3 options that feel identical to me. I could double revenue with this budget. I could raise revenue by 30%, keeping budget and headcount flat. If we emphasize here, I could do some third option. And the combination that the person you're talking to picks will show you which of those variables matters more to them. So to you, if those are all the same and achievable, then, okay, we want this approach with this. We'll say, okay, then budget or revenue growth or whatever is more important than the others, and it lets you develop a strategy. And then making sure the goals seem adequately ambitious so they know you're not sandbagging. But they do have to be achievable, A, for your own reputation, but it's also just morale for the team, right? It's not, I think sometimes people think, oh, we'll set really ambitious goals. And even if we only hit 70% of them, that's better than hitting a non-ambitious goal and hitting 110% of it. And there are times and places for that, I think, but you can't go 18 months, 3 years of not hitting goals without it impacting morale or feeling like the goals are arbitrary anyway. So I really do think that it's important to anchor in some benchmark and understand why the person you're talking to cares.
And making sure that the people on the team are the right fit for the goals
Right.
that you're trying to achieve as well, and either upscale through augmenting current team members, moving other team members into other areas, or training on a skills gap.
Absolutely. Or relentlessly prioritizing and finding cross-functional resources elsewhere. I couldn't agree more.
So how do you empower teams to stay aligned on all the metrics? And we've got an impact meeting every Wednesday in the agency, and we've got a form that everyone comes to the table, fills out on behalf of, their KPIs for their clients, and then really what we're measuring, the big goals that we're measuring against. And it just really creates that alignment, number one, but ideation outside of it. If something's not performing, we'll ideate as a whole team, even with team members that aren't on that specific account, to make sure that we're thinking outside of the box and really taking a troubleshooting approach with it.
I love it. I do something very similar, I think for very similar reasons. One, surfacing what isn't working in a way that says, I need help and it's not blame is
Yeah.
great. Two, you've also anchored, I think, the right cadence of metrics that matter. So weekly metric updates for things that you can move weekly, cascading into a monthly look back, look ahead. This is what we achieved in the last month. This is the focus for the month ahead. And then quarterly, how did we perform on those? Likely setting goals at least by the half or the year. And so you have the right cadence of consistently reinforcing these are the most important things to move. Here's how we're measuring them. This is how we'll know if things are off track. And then there's no blame of this week fell off, etc. We have a tracker too. It's very similar. Things are either on track, at risk, blocked, complete, not happening. And things can move throughout a day. It can be go from at risk because there's a blocker to on track because it's resolved. And at risk just means something's up. It may not happen. I need help, not I've done something wrong. And so I think that the culture of how you present data is the biggest part of making it valuable.
Well, and empowering the teams to innovate their, to make sure that they're always thinking about, yes, what is, but what can be or what is next, I think is a really important piece that can get lost in translation.
Totally. Absolutely. What's next? How have these learnings applied to making us better in the future? And why does it matter? Totally agree.
We're at the end of the show. I can't believe this. What additional insights or advice do you have for our audience today regarding life lessons that you've learned, something that you'd never repeat again? Anything like that you feel could be impactful?
It's a great question. There's two that come to mind. One is I first learned this in disc golf, know your miss. So in disc golf, it means if you often miss to the left, aim too far to the right. When you're throwing, it's going to feel off. You're going to feel like you're aiming too far right. It doesn't feel right. I think in marketing, it's the same thing. If your miss is that you're too measured or cautious or calculating and overanalyze, then shipping something before it feels ready or making a decision with incomplete data could be the miss that you need to bring yourself back to equilibrium.
I love that.
Opposite, right? If you make decisions too intuitively, can't back them up by data, something that feels like you're going too slow, too much data, etc., could be the miss that you need. So if you're honest with yourself about your miss, your management style, your communication style, your miss in marketing, then if you think you're doing something too soon or too late, it could be exactly what you need.
Thank you for that. These insights are phenomenal. I've got one final question for you. We started in January, this Better At approach. We as marketers know that we are always looking at what's around the corner or trying to establish trend. In order to do so, we've got this mindset of always wanting to be better at something in order to really help achieve our goals. Today, we're talking about KPIs. Tomorrow, it could be about awareness. I mean, just all these sort of things that are very, very important. What is one skill or mindset shift that helped you become better at your work, and how do you apply it to impact others?
Making decisions from principles. If you can articulate your principles up front, then you're not relitigating every decision. And this is easy to think, but really hard to do. One of my core principles, I got it from my husband, is don't sit on the bench. And that means if your talents and skills aren't being utilized, go create a new court, make a new case for something. Don't sit on the bench. But in reality, sitting on the bench is very comfortable. It sometimes feels good to stay in a familiar, comfortable place where coach is calling the shots. And so actually making the decision to take a bold swing, proposing a campaign that may be risky, make another big move. It feels hard to actually make the decision, but I've never regretted a decision made from principles, even if it meant it didn't pay off, because I knew that I was staying true to myself. And the inverse is trying to force a fit when there isn't the alignment only works for so long.
Oh, I love that, Rebecca. That's fabulous. What is the best way for our audience to get in contact with you?
I love LinkedIn. Rebecca Shaddix on LinkedIn.
Well, that's great. Well, we'll make sure that they reach out there. And if you'd like to get a hold of me, of course, you can reach me, Lori Sartorius Jones, on LinkedIn as well. And go ahead and email me, Lori@StrategyCast.com. Rebecca Shaddix, thank you so much for your appearance on StrategyCast.
Thank you, Lori. It's been great to be here.
That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on today's show. We hope your strategic brains are spinning with new ideas and bold inspiration that will elevate your strategies and marketing know-how.